We often think about markets as one of two extremes, either tons of companies in a brutal price war or one giant monopoly calling all the shots. But the reality is, most of the businesses we interact with every day live in this fascinating gray area, a messy middle. And today, we're going to jump right into that middle to figure out how competition really works. And this isn't a new idea. Way back in 1776, Adam Smith, pretty much the father of modern economics, he pointed out this basic temptation. He basically said, look, when people from the same line of work get together, you can bet they're not just there to talk about the weather. Something's usually up. And that temptation, well, it leads to some pretty wild stories. I mean, this sounds like it's straight out of a spy movie, right? Picture this. The top executives from the four biggest soap companies in France. These guys control 90% of the market, meeting in secret in these little out-of-the-way cafes all over Paris. So what was their high-stakes mission? Were they trading state secrets? Nope. It was something much more common. It was a conspiracy to kill off competition and secretly fix the price of something you've definitely got at home: laundry detergent. And get this, it wasn't just some weird one-off thing happening in France. At pretty much the exact same time, halfway across the world, the top 5 ice makers in the American Midwest were up to the very same thing. They were secretly agreeing to carve up the market for bagged ice. So this all brings up a huge question. Why? Why would executives in, let's be honest, kind of boring industries like soap and ice risk massive fines, even jail time, just to team up against their own customers? Well, the answer isn't just about greed. It's actually baked into the very structure of their markets. To really get this, we have to stop thinking about competition as just an on or off switch. It's really more of a spectrum. On one end, you have tons of firms, and on the other, you have just one. So it's super important to understand these two extremes. First, you've got perfect competition. Imagine a farmer's market. Lots of farmers all selling identical wheat. No single farmer can decide the price, right? They're price takers. On the complete opposite end is a monopoly. That's one firm, one unique product, and they have all the power to set the price. They're the price maker. But, and this is the key, most of the economy lives somewhere in between these two poles. All right, so let's make our first stop in this messy middle, monopolistic competition. Now, I know that sounds like a total contradiction in terms, but it actually describes most of the retail world that you and I live and shop in every day. The best way to get your head around this is to just think about a giant mall. You've got dozens and dozens of stores selling women's clothes, but they're not all the same, are they? Ann Taylor is not Urban Outfitters, and neither of them is Victoria's Secret. They're all competing, sure, but they're not selling the exact same thing. Each one has its own little twist. And that brings us to the key concept here: differentiated products. When a company makes its product distinctive, even in a small way, it creates a sort of mini monopoly for its specific version. That gives them a little bit of power to set their own price, because you can't get that exact shirt or that exact experience anywhere else. So how do they pull this off? Well, a few ways. It can be a physical thing, like a pan that has a special non-stick surface. It can be all about location. The gas station that's right at the busy intersection has a huge advantage. It can be intangible things, like a reputation for great quality or offering a money-back guarantee. And, of course, a huge one is just perception. All the advertising that makes you believe one brand of ketchup is just better. Okay, but what's really interesting here is the trade-off this creates for all of us. On the one hand, this constant push to be different gives us amazing variety, and it really drives innovation. That's the good news. The downside? Well, these companies aren't producing things at the absolute rock-bottom lowest cost. All that variety we love, it comes with a price tag. Okay, let's hop over to the other side of the messy middle. And this is the one that's going to take us right back to our soap and ice conspirators. We're talking about an oligopoly. And that's just a fancy word for when an industry is dominated by a small number of very big firms. And you definitely know these names. When it comes to big airplanes, it's pretty much just Boeing and Airbus. In the world of soft drinks, it's the legendary rivalry between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. These are industries that are incredibly hard for new companies to break into, so a few giants end up running the whole show. This next quote, wow. It was actually recorded on an FBI wiretap during another investigation, and it is absolutely chilling. An executive from a company called Archer Daniels Midland just spelled out the entire oligopoly playbook. He said, the goal isn't to crush your competitor, it's to work with them to get more money from the customer. So this creates this intense pressure cooker, right? These few big companies know they could all make monopoly-level profits if they just work together. But at the same time, each one is tempted to cheat on the deal to grab an even bigger piece of the pie for themselves. And to understand this back and forth, economists use a brilliant tool from game theory called the prisoner's dilemma. So here's the classic setup. Two partners in crime get busted. The police separate them so they can't talk. If they both stay silent, they each get a light sentence, just 2 years. But if one of them confesses and rats out the other, the snitch gets only 1 year, while their partner gets 8. Now, if they both confess, they both get 5 years. So the dilemma is that from each prisoner's point of view, confessing is always the safest move, no matter what the other one does. And so they both confess and end up with a worse outcome than if they just cooperated. And this is the exact trap that oligopolies fall into. If both firms cooperate and keep their output low, they both make a cool $1,000. But that temptation to cheat is just huge. Firm A thinks, hey, if I break the deal and ramp up production, I can make $1,500. But of course, firm B is thinking the exact same thing. So what happens? They both cheat, they flood the market, the price tanks, and they each end up with only $400. Way, way worse than if they just stuck to the plan. Okay, so now that we've got this theory in our back pocket, let's go back to those secret meetings in Paris and the Midwest. How did this whole thing finally play out for our soap and ice cartels? For the French laundry detergent gang, the consequences were pretty severe. They got hit with a combined fine of 361 million euros. Ouch. And the American ice makers, they didn't get off easy either. Their little conspiracy to fix prices cost them fines totaling about $600,000. That's a pretty steep price to pay over a product that sells for less than $3 a bag. So the bottom line is that both stories ended pretty much the same way. The soap cartel, just like in our prisoner's dilemma, eventually fell apart because members started cheating on the agreement to get ahead. And in the end, both groups got caught and paid a very heavy price for trying to rig the game. And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. This messy middle is where most of our economy lives and breathes, and it's a constant, difficult trade-off. On one side, we get all the variety and innovation that comes from monopolistic competition. On the other, we're always facing the risk that these big oligopolies will try to collude, cut our choices, and raise prices. So this leaves a final question for you. Every time you go out and buy something, you're interacting with this messy middle. When you choose that big, heavily advertised brand instead of the generic one, you're casting a vote for product differentiation. When you notice that prices for airline tickets or cell phone plans all seem suspiciously similar, well, you're seeing that delicate oligopoly dance in action. So it makes you think, what do you really want? More variety or lower prices? Every time you shop, you're voting. What's your choice?